Once I was willing to be honest with myself, honest with Omar, I could admit where I was wrong. I could admit my part in our dysfunction, and I could admit and own really the part that was mine to own. Once I was able to do that, I could start working on my piece of the puzzle and not settle for okay, or not settle for terrible, or whatever the flavor of the day was at the time, and really aim for something much better. And it's through that we were able to turn toward each other and soften our hearts toward each other, and start naming the things that we wanted to be. We wanted to see in our lives, in our marriage, in our home, with our kids, and start working on those things.
Hello and welcome to Stories of Legacy. We are so honored to have Claire here today, who is going to share her story of marriage and parenting and some advice, especially for those couples who have an international marriage where maybe you're mixed or you're married with somebody else from another culture. So this episode is going to be exciting for you. So let us first introduce you and share your story, please, with us. Claire, how you met your husband and the story of you two.
I'm Claire Montenegro. I'm 35 years old. Omar and I have been married for 10 years. We've got two boys that are 5 and 6. And oh gosh, how did we meet? It seems like a long time ago. We met at salsa dancing in our local city area, and that was the beginning of it. I was with a friend, and he was with his brother and his cousin, and we were all hung out, and we met for the first time there. We began dating soon after that, and were engaged 11 months later, married, I think, 4 or 5 months after that.
And where is Omar from?
Omar is from Guatemala originally. He moved here when he was 21 to the United States, and he has since seen most of his family move here to Minnesota, but they were all born in Guatemala.
All right, so let's touch on this aspect of different cultures. So Claire, you are from where?
I'm from Wisconsin.
So we have a mixture of cultures here, Guatemala mixing with Midwestern American. So how was that, Claire, marrying somebody from a different culture? I guess you don't know anything different, but what has it been like married to a Guatemalan?
Well, one of the things that really attracted me to Omar at first were that he is from a different culture. Latin cultures are very warm, they're very friendly, they're very family oriented, and that was really attractive to me, and it was fun, it was exciting, and he's very romantic, and so that was a lot of fun at the beginning of our relationship. And so I think a lot of initially what drew me to him was his background, his culture, his family, because they were so different than mine, and I really enjoyed being around them. Again, they were just warm and accepting and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And so when did you realize that Omar was the right person for you? What were those qualities and characteristics you saw in him?
So there are so many things that I realized really quickly on that I really found comforting in Omar. I would say some of those characteristics initially were the fact that he seemed down to earth, he was relatable, easy to talk to, very romantic. But then as I began to learn more about him, who he is, who his family is, I saw a depth there that was really attractive as well. And so I heard stories about how much he looked up to his dad, for example, and who the person his dad was. He's passed away, and I've never been able to meet him, but to hear who he was through story, through interacting with Omar's extended family, I just felt as though their family structure was very solid, and that he was raised really well. And a lot of that shone through then as an adult and came out through how he treated people and how he interacted.
Okay, so you've been married 10 years, and that's a lot of life to experience together. and a lot of good times and maybe a lot of challenging times as well. Can you share a little bit? Have there been challenging times over those 10 years? And first of all, let's just start with that.
Yes, there definitely have been challenges. If anybody that's married that tells you there haven't been, they're lying. So of course there are challenges. That's what marriage is. It's being close to somebody and sharing life. And so putting two people that are different from each other in the same house, in the same life, is going to bring challenges. And for us, that was definitely true. I would say when we began to I would say probably when we became parents is when things started to get really challenging. Of course, bringing children into the world is an incredible joy. It is one of my very favorite things about this life, but it comes with a lot of work, a lot of challenges. And so what was happening at that time for me was where I was seeing the differences in our culture really manifest themselves in ways that weren't as pleasant, weren't as welcoming and attractive. And so when you're raised two different ways, even if you're from the same area, there still are going to be differences in every family of origin. And so that really was magnified at the time when we're emotionally spent. We have our boys are a year apart. So we had a 1-year-old and a newborn at the same time. And so we weren't sleeping. We weren't communicating well. Things just were not ideal. And so that brought a lot of challenges. It really magnified how Omar was raised, how I was raised, what our expectations are that we were aware of, unaware of when it comes to parenting. When you're given the responsibility of a life, then it brings out the best and worst in people, and it definitely did for us. And so it was during that time that I really got to see Omar and myself discover new parts of ourselves. Neither of us had parented before. Neither of us had been married before. And so just as much as we had to learn about each other during that time, we were also learning a lot about ourselves and being thrown situations we had never experienced before. And so it really took its toll on our marriage. We really had a really challenging season, a long season of disappointment, resentment, anger, bitterness, sadness, loneliness. You can feel very alone even when you're surrounded by people. And so it was during that time for me, especially, that I really struggled in a lot of ways, as so many new parents do. But I was disappointed. I thought that marriage was a fairy tale. I thought marriage was something that was happy and fun all of the time. That's my personality. And so it was disappointing to see that, oh, this can be really tough. It can be challenging, and so it was really eye-opening for me, and it lasted a long time.
Can you look back and see where there was a turning point? So it was challenging. You're in the midst of having children and not really understanding and communicating with each other. But when did it shift and begin to change? And what were those factors that helped you and Omar change in the midst?
I would say a big turning point for me particularly was when I realized that I did struggle a lot with depression and anxiety, and then also stemming from that, just this reality of being a new mom was a lot of expectation and pressure for me. And once I admitted really kind of where I was at, the things that I was thinking, the thoughts that I had, once I was able to sort of step out of my situation and look at it from the outside in and realize things aren't great. I don't want this to be our lives. I don't want this to be my marriage. I don't want to raise children in this environment where, we're not on the same team, we're not on the same page. And each person in a marriage has to decide that. And so I decided that this isn't what I wanted. This is just a learning phase, I guess, for me. And so I did what I could do, and I focused on myself. I focused on learning what it takes to live this new normal of being a parent, being in a marriage, juggling a full-time job, a new home. All of the things that bring us joy can also bring so much expectation. And so once I was willing to be honest with myself, honest with Omar, I could admit where I was wrong. I could admit my part in our dysfunction, and I could admit and own really the part that was mine to own. Once I was able to do that, I could start working on my piece of the puzzle and not settle for okay, or not settle for terrible, or whatever the flavor of the day was at the time, and really really aim for something much better. And it's through that we were able to turn toward each other and soften our hearts toward each other, and start naming the things that we wanted to be. We wanted to see in our lives, in our marriage, in our home, with our kids, and start working on those things. And then another part of that was to start being honest with each other and acknowledge the things that were just going to be different. And sometimes I think, especially when you're sleep deprived and you're emotionally drained, I think that you can take offense really easily. You can take things really personally. And once I was able to have a thought of, I think this situation just is, or I think Omar sees things differently, and not be so offended and take things so personally, it created some space to work together and work on the same team. And it's constant. And even not being in that early phase anymore with young kids, it's something that takes work always. And so we're just committed to that. We're committed to making it work and talking things out all of the time, really.
I like that. A key thing that I picked up on is a few times you said team, and that we're on the same team, and that even before you could tell that you were kind of struggling against each other and that you weren't working on the same team. So working together and working towards each other and working as a team, that's really wonderful. Now, in the times when it seemed maybe hopeless or despairing, where did your hope come from, or what gave you hope that you had something to hold on to? Or did you not? Did you feel like there is no hope in the most difficult times? Because I think all of us who have been married can relate that there are times of despair, there are times of hopelessness, but where is that hope that you have, that you were able to hold on to, both you and Omar, that you can struggle for a better marriage and become better individuals as well?
Mm-hmm. There were days of hopelessness. There were times of feeling like, I don't know if we can make this happen. I don't know if we can make this work. And so that feeling of hopelessness was definitely present often in that season for both of us. And so we're able to find hope and strength, honestly, in God. When I think of the times when I don't have the strength to make something happen and I'm inadequate, I'm not enough, it's when I remember that God is my strength and can get me through really challenging times. And so I had to look upward and find my strength in my faith. And I think that another thing that really provided hope was to just constantly remind ourselves, people are married all over the world. People have managed marriage for centuries, traced back to the beginning of time. And if somebody else can do it, we can probably figure this out too. And just give grace to ourselves and realize that we're human, that we are flawed. And so how do we manage what we have, what we do have, the skills that we have, the areas that we each bring to the table that we can rely on, and just slowly start to build on that and realize that we are on the same team. My husband doesn't want our marriage to fail. I don't want our marriage to fail. And so because I can remind myself of that, then we can really accomplish anything that life throws at us. And it's during those times when we feel down or hopeless that honestly, like our kids, just thinking of our kids and what they mean to us pulls us through an awful lot too. We've found a lot of strength being parents and realizing that we're able to love these two children so much that we would honestly do a whole lot more for them than we would even for ourselves. And so that might be backwards, but we found a lot of strength in realizing who we want our kids to be. So it's worth it to get through the ugly times, get through the difficult conversations for ourselves and for our family and what we want. It takes a fight sometimes to overcome. So.
And that's a good transition now into parenting. But let's begin with family values. It's something that is very essential to each family, but is that something you and Omar have talked about, is what you value in your family and how you want to raise your children? Can you just talk a little bit about family values and what that means to you and Omar?
Yeah, so for us, I would say our biggest value here in our day-to-day operations is family. Family is very important to us. We talk a lot about it. As I mentioned, Omar comes from a Latino background where family is everything. And so we've incorporated that into our family, and we teach our boys on a regular basis that family matters so much more than most of the things that we see in our day-to-day life. The friends that we have, the friends that will come and go. Our boys are in elementary school right now, so they have a new teacher every year. They have a new set of friends every year. But what never changes is family. And so that's a big value for us. Another is just character. Our boys are asking questions like, why is it okay for this friend at school to get away with this at home, and why do we have this rule, or why are we this way? And so what I found myself focusing on when I'm having those conversations with my kids is not so much answering their questions of, well, so and so may do this because they make bad choices. I don't say that. I say, you know what we are as the Montenegros, that's our last name. We are kind. Montenegros are polite. Montenegros are helpful. And even if somebody doesn't help, that doesn't make it right. This is what we can focus on. These are the values that we want to instill for our boys, to say, this is who we are. And even though other people don't live life that way, that's their choice. And our choice is to be whatever the characteristic is at the moment, helpful or kind or apologetic or whatever the word is that we choose. But we can focus on that.
That's good. How do you incorporate these family values into your everyday life? So in school, the children come home and they talk about what's happened at school. But how about in your everyday lives? What do you do maybe on a daily basis to give other people inspiration for how to live out these values into your life?
Well, I know for me, one thing that's been really helpful for me to do as a parent is be consistent in addressing things. My personality does not lend itself to that at all. I love people and I love them to all get along, and so I avoid conflict at all costs. But as a parent, I can't do that. And so I've really challenged myself to address things, have the conversation with my child that I would rather just let it pass. And so when they come home and they tell me what has happened at school or how so-and-so decided to behave, we talk about it, and I ask them questions like, how do you think that went? Do you think that was a helpful or hurtful response? Or I'll just ask open-ended questions, which keeps me accountable to, being able to address things as they come up, not to find the faults per se, but to be a sounding board for my kids so that they're having those conversations at home rather than leaving it up to the other 6-year-olds at school to decide what their character is going to be. So for me, a big piece is just entertaining the conversation, asking the questions that I might not want to ask, and really dig in. And even when my kids make mistakes, they make bad decisions, they're selfish, they're hurtful, when they are behaving badly, to not judge them and treat them with kindness and help them to understand how a situation could be handled better, but also not to excuse them and keep them accountable for their actions too.
That's really good. It's hard to do, but it's really important to do as a parent as well, to follow through, to be consistent, and to be honest and kind to your children as you're parenting. What would you say are some of the challenges with parenting? Maybe as well you have different cultures, you and Omar coming from different cultures as parents, and bringing those cultures together in parenting. Have you found any challenges then and differences in raising children, and how do you overcome that then with those challenges?
Yeah, so in our family with two different cultures, we go about life so differently. So when it comes to parenting, how we discipline our kids, what matters, what doesn't, holidays, gifts, how we provide for our children, we both have definitely different opinions on just about everything. And so we've found that just talking about it ahead of time is helpful. A lot of times we don't, and things don't go as well. But the times that we're able to set aside some time to know what's coming, to be prepared. Holidays are a big one, especially for us, that we've had our conversation, just the two of us in private, without our kids hearing us, to have a kind of game plan and some parameters set. I'm of the mindset that I'm more of a minimalistic approach to parenting. My husband loves to lavish gifts on our kids. And so what we do is have that boundaries talk beforehand of, okay, what's our plan? What's our budget? All those kinds of things, knowing that we both come to the table with completely different motives and perspectives. And so then we're able to just agree on that, compromise, and move on. And that's an ideal situation. Oftentimes we don't have the margin to have that conversation. And so then things don't go so well, but we're committed to at least shielding our kids from some of that, to say, what happens, and we can have a conversation about it in private later. And I think having that separation has been really helpful for us, of being really mindful what our kids are able to hear and not. And so we by no means want them to be shielded from difficulty, but I think there's a balance. And so whether or not they go well, it's having that time together, either beforehand or after in private, to set expectations, come to a compromise.
That's really great. Okay, so if we sum this up in 3 pieces of advice that you would give from your experience as being a parent, as well as adding in that intercultural perspective, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to other couples that are maybe parenting children that are coming to the table with 2 different cultures? What would you give to them? And also just general parenting advice too. What are 3 things you can think of to help other parents in a similar situation?
The 3 things I would just encourage anyone that's in a situation where you've especially got 2 really different cultures is, first of all, chill out. I would say, and I'm telling myself that, to have this idea that there is no right or wrong way to parent. When you look at the entire world, all the cultures, all the traditions that exist, they're all incredible and beautiful and worthy of being celebrated. So I would say to remember that your way isn't the only way. The second piece of advice I would say is to just ask a lot of questions. Be a student of your spouse, be a student of their family, of their culture. Ask a lot of questions. How do you celebrate this holiday? What holidays do you have that are important to you? What are, behaviors that you'd like us to have as a family? Ask relatives, ask a lot of questions and be a student. And then third, embrace the journey. Just enjoy it, because though traditions and cultures can set our trajectory, they don't get to determine every single day. That's something that you and your spouse get to determine. And so create your own family traditions and blend the two backgrounds as best as you can, and make sure that both sides are represented. Most likely there's a dominant culture based on where you live, but make sure there's a lot of space for the other culture as well. And just embrace it and come up with your own way of doing things, and be open-minded.
That's really good. I know I said that was our last, but one more. 3 more pieces of advice for those who are married as well. So when you're looking at your couple and the spouses, what would you give for advice for those that are married, and maybe with another culture in there, but in general as well.
Yeah. So I could probably talk for a long time about marriage, but if I summed it up into three just takeaways, I would say, first of all, chill out. It's the same advice for parenting. There are so many things that we could point at each other for doing wrong, but just remember that each person in the marriage is failed and flawed, and that's just the way things are. And so you have to accept that, chill out, it's going to be okay. The second thing is live in a way, or look at your life in a way that's a little bit bigger picture. We can get so caught up in the tiny things that bring us pain and hurt that are either intended or unintended, but those are tiny, and when you look at the bigger picture, it helps you to really see, okay, this is the general direction that I want us to be going, and that can help you get through those painful moments. And then third, I would say, assume the best. That's so hard as humans, but it's so important in marriage to assume the best. Assume that they have good intentions, that your partner loves you and is for you and is for your marriage and your family. And so when you begin assuming that, then the conversation goes a completely better way than it does if you don't. So assume the best in each other.
Wow, I think I need to hear that today. And I'm sure there's a few others too that are encouraged by what you've had to say, Claire. And thank you so much for sharing your life, opening your heart, and giving us a little taste into the wisdom that you have. And there's so much more. And we want to encourage you to gain that wisdom and to learn for yourselves. So take away what Claire has said today and learn from her story, and we hope that you are encouraged and inspired by what she's had to share.